Alright, so in this video, we're going to discuss our understanding of Barrett's article regarding the status of psychoanalytic concepts. And since some of the concepts have been discussed naman na in our class, we're just going to make this as concise as possible. Alright, so let's first discuss the concepts. First, we have the unconscious. No? It's a poorly unresolved experiences from our early age na when we have painful or embarrassing memories, binabaon natin to so we could somehow feel at ease, which happens automatically. But the thing is, hindi kasi sila basta-basta mababaon lang at magdi-disappear kasi they will always resurface kapag na-trigger siya as we grow up. Next, we have drives. No? These are like the natural forces inside us that push us to do things to respond, halimbawa sa hunger, pleasure, and even the need for control. But it's important to take note that the way we are driven to respond to things is dependent sa environment na kinalakihan natin at kung paano tayo pinalaki. No? So how our parents respond to our emotional cues when we were a child shapes how we will handle emotions as we grow up. And this idea is similar to our next concept, which is parent-infant and parent-child relationships. Because this concept explains that our early relationship with our parents shapes our identity and behavior. So for example, if a child feels ignored or rejected, they might struggle with building relationships when they grow up. So next is Oedipus complex. Now this concept explains that during the phallic stage, which is 3 months to 6 months, an infant or a child may feel unconscious desire for the opposite sex parent and rivalry or jealousy naman toward the same sex parent. It's like a child might want more attention from one parent but also fear that the other parent will get angry. And lastly, defenses. No? We have defense mechanisms that our mind uses to help us cope whenever we feel anxious or threatened. And the common ones are number 1, repression. It's when we suppress painful memories. But then again, no, unconsciously nga may tendency na mag-resurface to in different ways like dreams, language, etc. Next is denial. No? This is when we refuse to accept something that feels too painful or something na maaapakan yung pride or ego natin. Third is projection. Ito naman, this happens when we attribute or blame something to others that we actually unconsciously have or feel. Fourth is fantasy. It's like daydreaming to escape reality, like a stressful situation, for example. And fifth is identification. This is when someone acts like another person, often someone they fear or admire. And lastly, intellectualization, which happens when, for example, instead of expressing sadness or anger, they talk about their problems in a scientific way because for some, it helps them avoid dealing with, their true emotions.
Let's move on to psychoanalytic concepts in therapy. So these help explain paano nag-work yung therapy and bakit may certain emotions na nagka-come up in the process. Para mas mapadali, gagamitin ko example si Ray, and Ray struggles with trust issues. So she often feels abandoned in relationship and ngayon nagsisik na siya ng help sa isang therapist. Isa sa pinakaunang pwedeng mangyari sa therapy is transference. So this is when a patient unconsciously treats their therapist like someone from their past. So sa case ni Ray, say for example, ang parent niya ay emotionally distant. So ngayon kapag biglang tumahimik yung therapist niya, she feels like or she assumes that they're losing interest in her. So transference is important because it reveals emotional patterns that the patient may not even realize they have. Now, the therapist isn't immune to emotions either. So, countertransference happens when the therapist reacts emotionally to the patient's transference. So, say for example, yung therapist ay meron din sarili experiences ng abandonment. So, they might feel extra responsible sa feelings ni Ray and possible na mag-overcompensate by being overly reassuring. So, ang key dito is for the therapist to be aware of this and not let their personal experiences interfere with the patient's progress. Then there's resistance, which is when a patient unconsciously avoids dealing with difficult emotions. So madalas yan, no? Say for example, Ray wants to trust people, but confronting her fear of abandonment is really, really scary. So possible na mag-cancel siya ng sessions, i-divert yung convo in a different direction, or even say na hindi naman nakaka-apekto yung past niya sa kanya. It's not that she doesn't want to change. It's the part of her afraid of the emotional discomfort that comes with it. So recognizing this push and pull is part of the therapy process. Now, this is where the therapist comes in. So, interpretation is when they help the patient connect the dots from past experiences to current behavior. So, in Ray's case, her therapist might say na it seems like when someone is emotionally distant, you automatically feel abandoned. So, do you think this could be related to how your parents treated you? Something along those lines. So, a good interpretation helps the patient see patterns they may not have noticed before, and this allows them to work on changing those behaviors. But not all interpretations are spot on. So, according to QB 1952, an interpretation is accurate if the patient recognizes it as true, it helps reduce their symptoms, and it allows them to predict and understand their own behavior better. So, a more systematic way to check this is the CCRT, or core conflictual relationship theme, which looks at the patient's recurring relationship patterns. So, if the therapist's interpretations aligns with the CCRT and leads to real insight, it's most probably accurate. So that's it for the psychoanalytic concepts in therapy.
Psychodynamic theory has faced criticism for lacking scientific support, but there's evidence that confirms key psychoanalytic concepts. So let's start with the unconscious mind. Chevron et al. Provided empirical evidence for the unconscious by studying 11 patients with phobias or grief. They found unconscious words were identified faster with brief exposure, while conscious words needed longer. Patients with stronger repression tendencies recognized conflict-related words better, which supports psychoanalytic theory. Next, we move on to drives, which are internal motivational forces. Although difficult to study, Schwartz's theory links drives to affect and neurophysiology. Research shows that frontal lobe damage disrupts emotions, leading to apathy or excessive motivation. Animal studies also highlight the role of the dopaminergic system in drives, confirming that changes in brain chemistry affect motivation. For parent-infant and parent-child relationships, Bowlby highlighted how early relationships impact lifelong emotional connections. Secure childhood attachments lead to stable adult relationships, while insecure ones cause emotional issues. Studies on rhesus monkeys showed healthier attachments with mothers, and Shore linked emotional bonds to brain development, particularly in the right hemisphere. The CCRT method reveals that early patterns persist, which shapes adult interactions. Next, the Oedipus complex. Although there's no direct evidence for the Oedipus complex, research into unconscious relationship patterns supports its existence in a broader sense. The CCRT method and dream analysis revealed recurring themes of interpersonal competition, which align with the unconscious dynamics described by the Oedipus complex. However, direct evidence of Oedipal triangulation is still lacking. For defense mechanisms are crucial in distinguishing psychological disorders. While stable, they can shift during therapy. The CCRT method connects them to interpersonal patterns, emphasizing their role as adaptive coping strategies for anxiety.
For evidence naman for transference, the CCRT or core conflictual relationship theme supports the presence of transference as seen in studies linking Freud description to CCRT components. Research shows that interpersonal patterns observed in therapy mirror those with others. Hence, fewer transference interpretations are linked to better therapy outcomes, with a strong therapeutic alliance being key for success. Meanwhile, for countertransference, yung research dito is challenging since treatment typically focuses on the patient rather than the therapist. However, studies suggest that managing countertransference can improve treatment outcomes. Halimbawa na lang is yung paggamit ng CCRT formulations and accurate interpretations reduces countertransference, and the ability to manage it correlates with better results. Hence, despite limited research, findings indicate that effectively handling countertransference benefits the therapeutic process. Moving on for evidence for resistance, studies show resistance is linked to therapeutic alliance. Research suggests that a more directive therapy increases resistance. So despite ongoing debates over its definition, evidence supports the significant role of the concept in psychotherapy, impacting both the alliance and treatment success. For interpretation naman, research showed patterns between symptoms and context as reflected in the symptom context method. While there are studies showing a positive relationship between interpretation and treatment outcome, recent research has found an inverse connection between the two. Nonetheless, a review of 38 studies found that interpretation was positively linked to therapy outcomes in 62% of the cases. Lastly, for the evidence for accuracy of interpretation, it is shown when a patient's reactions align with the interpretation and future behavior is predictable. However, research indicates that people may accept inaccurate interpretations, thus measures exist to assess interpretation accuracy. Other studies demonstrates that accurate interpretations predict better treatment outcomes, except for highly perfectionist patients, as found in a study by Blatt in 1998.